All right, fourth grade, last week when we were here, you cut out your own organic shapes and you traced those on your paper and organized it so it was inspired by Andy Goldsworthy. Today what you're going to be doing is painting in those leaves with some watercolor paints. So if you have not colored the background black, that's your first step. If the background is black, the next thing you need to do is, as a number 3 chair, go and get 2 or 3 palettes of watercolor paints, because as you look inside them, you might notice that I don't have all of the colors here, but between 2 or 3 palettes, I should have everything that I need to paint. You are going to be painting in your leaves. You need to think about your color wheel, colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, neighbors, because watercolor paint tends to mix. So we want to put good colors next to each other that are going to mix well. Okay, so when I am painting today, I'm going to show you 3 different techniques. The first technique that I'm going to show you is called wet on wet. So I'm getting my brush nice and wet. I'm going to fill in this whole leaf with water. Okay, my water is really clean right now, so you can't really see what's happening there. Okay, but just know that it's wet. And then I'm going to dip and swipe in my palette and grab some paint. And I can just kind of have that paint spread on top. Wet on wet means my paper is wet and my paint is wet. Okay? Do you see those little blossoms of paint showing up from my wet paintbrush? Okay? I could incorporate maybe some different colors, so they have to be next to each other. I might maybe use a little bit of purple and just dab that on top. And you notice how those colors start to mix together? Okay, they kind of bleed together, those little blossoms. Okay, so wet on wet is my first technique for you today. My second technique for you today is just painting normally. Okay, I'm going to fill this in a little bit more. So I'm going to clean out my brush by having it jump in the bottom of the cup. If it dips, wipe it on the lip. I might just paint just like I would with acrylic, but it is watercolor paint. So I can do things like incorporate lines into my work and fill those in. Just kind of notice that with watercolor on this paper, it's really hard to make it so that your colors don't mix together. So if you're painting wet on dry, just kind of be aware of that. Your colors are still going to mix a little because that water starts to blend across your paper. Okay? So wet on dry, that would just be like a normal painting, right? I'm going to paint in this whole leaf and not leave any white space. That's my goal for each of the leaves today. And I could come back and do some really cool line patterns on top of this after I have my layer. Painting with watercolor, you can really think about layering that color light to dark. Think about that value. Where things start to overlap, I can see darker values being created. My second technique, or third technique, and last technique for you today is called dabbing off. Okay? Dabbing off means I am going to lay down some color and then use a small piece of paper towel to lift some of that color off. And that's a really interesting way to create some texture on the watercolor. I'm just going to lay down some color really quick, keeping in mind that they're all in that same color family or neighbors, because they're going to mix a little bit. That's just how watercolor works. And with a small piece of paper towel, I can press and lift to pull up some watercolor. And that might mean that it spreads to another spot. That also might mean that I have some lighter areas and some darker areas. So your 3 techniques today are dabbing off, wet on dry, and wet on wet. You need to paint in each of your leaves for today with one of those 3 techniques. Kind of experiment with your color and techniques, 4th grade.